this is an introduction to the next 3 sections on how to account for material, labor and overheads. So the reason we split our manufacturing costs into these 3 cost elements, material, labor and overheads, is because they are accounted for in different ways. So let's have a look at our trailer making company and the cost they incur. And then we'll group them into these 3 cost elements. So the first cost element is material. So our material is anything that we buy and use in the production of our trailers, or it might be something that we buy and use somewhere in the administration office. So it's something also that can be stored, or it doesn't have to necessarily be used immediately. So that would be our steel, the rivets and our stationery. So it's physical material that we buy. Next, we have labor. So labor is anything where we pay someone for the time that they spend manufacturing the product or working for the company. So that would be our welder, the cleaners, and our accountants. So they get either paid either a salary or a wage. And then finally, we have overheads. So overheads are all the costs that cannot be directly traced to our product or our cost object, which is our trailers in this case. So anything that's not a direct cost, in other words, all the indirect costs are our overheads. So if you think back of cost classification, classification by traceability or assignment, so we need to first establish which cost we can assign directly to the trailer, and then all the costs that we cannot assign are our overheads. So our steel is easy to trace to the trailers. We know how much steel we use on each specific trailer. So that's a direct material or direct cost. And then our welders, the time spent welding can be accurately traced to the trailers. We can keep track of the time of the welders on each trailer. So that's direct labor. Now the rivets, in theory we could count all the rivets, but because they're worth very little compared to the rest of the costs, and they might use slightly more or less on each trailer, it's not that easy to trace it directly to the trailers. So that's an indirect cost. So that's part of overheads. And the same with the cleaners. We don't know how much time is spent on each specific trailer because they clean the factory. So that's also an overhead. It's an indirect labor. And then all the other costs. So the factory's rental, and then the stationery, telephone, and the accountants, none of these costs can be traced to the trailers or to each specific product. So these costs make up our overheads, because they're all indirect costs. Now, the last classification or split that we need to do are our manufacturing costs and non-manufacturing costs, because they are also accounted for in different ways. So manufacturing costs are all the costs that has to do with manufacturing or the manufacturing process, all the costs that are necessary to make the trailers. So that would be our direct material, our indirect material, the rivets, but not the stationery. And then for the labor, it would be our welders. They have to make the trailers. The cleaners clean the factory or the space where we manufacture. But the accountant does not touch the trailers. He is not part of the manufacturing process. And then finally, the building, the rental of the factory, that's part of the manufacturing process. We need the factory to make the trailers, but the telephones are not necessary to make the trailers. So everything to the left of this line would be our manufacturing costs, and everything to the right of this line are non-manufacturing costs. And during the next few lectures, we'll go into each of these three cost elements, material, labor, and overheads, and see how we account for the different cost elements.